They're
You
reversed.
got it. You got it. Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna make sure they were.
Okay.
We can't wait for you to show up.
So it's nice to see everybody. This is my second time doing this. We'll see if I do it again or not. What, I don't know what was done. I don't know what was done last week about the plagues, because I know that it was a guest rabbi. So what I thought I would do today, Parshat Bo is a continuation of the story of the plagues that begins, and it, three of the plagues are in the Parsha. And then the balance of the Parsha is the Exodus from Egypt and the instructions for observing Pesach. Because we're on the triennial cycle, this year is the first year of the triennial cycle. So it seemed to me logical that we would concentrate on those verses that are going to be read in shul today and finish the plagues. I did a handout. Everybody who is here in the room should be able to get it. It's here on the side. And we'll take into account that not everybody knows how to click and download. In the future, I think I'm not going to be the only one. I'm sure next week there's a guest lecture. Most likely be a handout. So you might want to ask a grandchild, a neighbor to show you how to click and do this, because I think they're going to become a more frequent feature of the classes. So that's the background. What I did in what I put together for you was, and that's how I'm going to try to divide up the hour, is an overview of how to think about the structure of the plagues, because I don't know if anybody has discussed that. And then I wanted to do a deep dive into the plagues, particularly the one that's on darkness, because I think that's the one that's the most troubling. And on the part that's being read here in shul today, the locust, arba, and choshech will be are the ones that will be done in the greatest depth. So many people have tried to make sense out of what the plagues, how the plagues are structured. And there are really two ways to look at them. Umberto Cassuto and several others think that the way to look at the plagues is in pairs. And his suggestion on them, which I put out for you, is to look at Dam and Svardeya as the plagues of the water. That's the blood and the frogs. Then to look at Kinim and Arov as plagues of the animals. A Dever Vishchin as those that affect the body. Barad and Arbe as those that threaten the land. And then Choshech and Makat Bechorot as darkness, both the darkness on the earth and the darkness of death. And so that, and a lot of people seem to see them that way. Another way that they're done as in terms of the translation, though still in pairs, is to think of the first one as the Nile rather than water in general, as insects rather than animals in general, as disease rather than affecting the body, as airborne disaster instead of looking at them as threatening the land, and then as darkness and death. However, there's another way of looking at them, which I was able to find an explanation of in Everett Fox, but I know it's not his. I know it's based on more classical commentators. And that is to look at them as 3, 3, and 3 plus 1. And seeing them as perfect numbers that are prime numbers that you can't divide. And that it's, in some ways it's like looking at the creation story, but in reverse. So there's several people who look at them that way. And yes.
There's some folks who just try to relate these plagues to natural phenomena, like in Florida. There's a certain time of year in certain portions of Florida where the water turns reddish. They call it the red tide.
So thank you. I was going to mention that as one of the things here in looking at them. My take on them is I am trying to look at them as symbolic and midrashic, and looking at them as structure. If you want to look at them from the point of view, is there any relationship to natural disasters and things that happened at that time? There's a very good article in biblical archaeology that I found online that tries to compare and tries to find things that happened in that part of the world that that could be related to this and that happened at other times. The one, that's why when we look at Choshech, that's the one there's been more attempts than any other that I could find midrashically also to try to relate it to true natural disasters. It's very hard to know whether there were things that happened at that time that have been allegorized into this or made into metaphors. We'll never know that. But however you look at them, they're certainly a very troubling set of calamities.
Well, I had a class a long time ago. Again, the natural calamities as opposed to miracles. But her comment was, it was a very bad year for Egypt.
Yes,
Okay, the Nile flooded, it became brown, and you got the frogs, you got the locusts. One thing followed the other. Cattle got disease. If you follow it in sequence, it makes a whole lot of sense. I mean,
yes. So one of the other things is the time period. Did these all happen in 1 year or not? And there's some midrashim that say that it happened in 1 year. And because we are not told if it's the next day, the following day, a month later. So that's another thing that is difficult to decide. Yes.
I don't think we have to dichotomize for people who think that, well, these are natural phenomena. If people believe that God runs the world, he's expressing himself through these natural phenomena.
Yes.
Those should not be either or.
That's a very good point on thinking about it.
To me, it's more than darkness, it's a social darkness. Because it says, "Velo ra'u ish et re'ehu."
Right, we will get to that. Thank you, Esther. Because one of the questions on that one particularly is what does it exactly mean? Now, the other thing I found for you was a very interesting chart. There's an article called "Four Ways of Understanding the 10 Plagues" by a woman named Nellie Altenberger. I have no idea who she is, but she put her article in Sefaria. And so I excerpt from it her chart. What she did, which is a very interesting way to think about them, is she's put all the names of the plagues.
Mhm.
Who was the person who instructed to do the plague? Those that are said by Aaron, those by Hashem, those by Moshe,
Mhm.
and those that had the use of the staff or the hand as the instruction to do it. And of course, the three that don't are the ones that are done by God. Which ones had a warning and which ones did not?
Only the first ones had a warning.
Well, if you look at her chart.
Isn't it 3 times and you're out? God gave them 3 warnings and not more.
Well, so some of them have more warnings than others, especially at the beginning. And then those that have an explanation and those as to why, because of what happened, and those that have a preparation for them. Station yourself, go to Pharaoh, etc. So I thought this was an interesting way to look at them as well and to see what was there. The other thing which is here, which I think is important, is there's you look at these as Everett Fox suggests, looking at the plague as a struggle between Pharaoh, who is a visible God to the Egyptians, and our God, who is an invisible God. And that it's a struggle between belief in something you cannot see and something that is visible to the Egyptians, and that they can't understand something like that. And you see that all through, because as we look at this, the in between the instructions is the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and what is said about those. There's also the motifs of Moshe's staff, Aaron as agent, the magicians, and of course death. So those are going to work our way through all the plagues. And one of the things I wondered about, and I don't know if we just discussed it here, is the phrase shlach et ami. Did anyone discuss the various translations of it?
No,
So let's see, how does the Eitz Chaim translate shlach et ami?
What number is it?
Okay, well, it's used all through, when, it's
But
shlach et ami.
give me one of them, I can find it faster.
Okay, so, Parshat Bo starts on page 374. Let's see if we can find
It's
one.
the last sentence on, page, if you have 374, it's the last line.
Shlach et ami v'avdehu. So here,
Let my people go that we may worship him for,
Line 5.
yes, so thank you, Linda. So, the Eitz Chaim uses the classic translation. It's also in the King James version, the one that has been popularized in English in so many ways in various songs and spirituals and so on. Some of the more modern translations, Fox in particular, Alter, they all play with it and try to, send out my people, things of that nature. But it's interesting that the Eitz Chaim does the same thing as, I think Alter did the same thing. They felt that the translation of shlach et ami as let my people go is so famous that they did not want to play with it and try to get a translation closer to the meaning, send out my people. We expect it to be translated that way. So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about on that.
what is very interesting though, Sylvia, is it's like the beginning comments where they're 2 and 2, we spend so much time trying to figure out why it's in such an order. The plagues are in such an order. And how much did the people who wrote down the Bible, how much did they think of it?
may
You know
I?
what I mean? We have like 5 different ideas you've presented, and
Yes.
yet the people who wrote it down couldn't have thought of 5 different ideas. I mean, that would have taken.
Well, let me stop you before Esther speaks on that. In the section I gave you as the handouts, I gave you from some classic commentators. When I was looking, you can find 20, 30, 40 different ideas about what was happening here. And we're not, one of the things we're going to try to parse out what happened. But one of the issues is if we put ourselves in the face of Pharaoh and his magicians and his courtiers, that's the only place in all of this that we have any reactions. We have no reactions of the common people. Esther, what did you want to add? And then Ellie.
Well, Sheila was talking about the order, and it's interesting that the way I understood it is that it divided into 3 different sections. The first 3 makot were in the water, then in the land, and then in the sky. And it represents like the 3 branches of the army, like the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. And so God protects us from whatever direction you come at us.
Thank you. That's another way to look at it. So again, the 5 pairs or the 3, 3, 3 plus the 1.
I think what you said a few moments ago is very significant in terms of a Pharaoh as a god you can see, as opposed to our concept of God, which you cannot see. And I think in modern days, what attracts people to Christianity is he died for us. The blood and all of this, the God, that's the anthropomorphic notion of God through Jesus. I think that's what draws a lot of people to it.
I think that's one of the difficulties of theology. Said there's an all-powerful, all-seeing, but not can be seen. God is a different issue about faith. I looked up, I noticed in my own notes, the other ways that shlach et ami were translated. So Fox translated as set free my people that they serve me. Alter translates it, send off my people that they may worship me. So, and the rhythm of the old King James, let
Could
my
you
people
repeat it?
go.
Sylvia, would you repeat those 2 again?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Fox translates it, set free my people that they serve me. Alter translates it, send off my people that they may worship me. And this, and this is interesting compared to the fact that let my people go. And that they may worship me, which is from the old King James version of the Bible, has worked, is so famous that the Jewish translations are also using it. Linda.
I just think that the let my people go is more of a kind of a passive, release rather than send or set free. To me, seems more actionable. It takes more momentum to set them free, to send them off rather than, all right.
So I think the let my people go, if you look at things in the way that is suggested of a visible God versus an invisible God. If Pharaoh is the all-powerful ruler, and those translations were done in England in the time when the king was the all-powerful ruler of, then the idea that the king had the power to let my people go would be why they would have used that kind of a translation. And in our times where we see more agency in individuals and as individuals rather than in a system, it doesn't ring as well for us. I want to take one more thing and then I want to get into the, I want to make sure everybody here in the room has made a comment on it.
I was just gonna say that the shlach on me, I immediately, my mind immediately went to shlach lecha. The hardship, which is really send.
Yes.
It's not let, it's send.
It's send off, and that's very true.
It's
In
an
modern
active
day
verb.
politics,
Just a minute, it's Elliot's turn next.
modern day politics, what about the power the president has to let people go, to pardon them?
So that's the same kind of a feeling of who has agency.
Nelson.
I want Larry and then we're going to do Nelson. I want to get everybody who hasn't had a chance to say something to talk.
If this is God saying, I have a hard time saying let. Because he God's got a purpose here, and because these words are coming from God, not from Moses.
Well, so that's one of the questions is which words are coming from God, which words are coming from
But it
Moses?
says, that said the Lord.
Yes,
So Moses is saying what God told him directly. I can't see God saying, oh, by the way, let people go. That's
Right.
very, very kind of,
right. So shlachet ami shlachet ami is much more powerful than the English
He's
translation.
commanding, basically, he's showing Pharaoh he is much stronger. He wouldn't ask me just simply let. To me, it just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Nelson wanted to say something.
Let my people go suggests to me that people are straining. If you just just turn them loose and they'll leave. But I don't think that's the story. Moses has to bring them. They don't seem ready to go as such. And he has
we know that Pharaoh and his court is not ready to let them go. That's for sure. But the Hebrew shlach et ami is much more powerful than any of these English translations. I think that's what we're concluding. And that's why the fact that this modern translation from the conservative movement also uses the old JPS used the old King James translation because it's so famous. Is that right? I don't think we agree that it is. Does anyone else want to make a comment on that before we move on? I think Esther does.
I like to connect the dots. And when you talked about to serve God and to worship God, reminded me when I studied comparative religion, they said the Christians revere God, the Muslims fear God, and we fight with him.
That's very nice. Thank you. Sheila, one last thing, then we're going to move on to the next
I
part.
think you were right. I mean, the Hebrew, the English is just something.
I can't hear you, Sheila.
The English is just something that it was nice English. It sounds better in English. And I think we have to look at it that way. There is no basis unless we know what the Greek said, and it was all a translation. Shlach is a transitive verb that's very powerful.
Yes.
Let is very permissive. It is nice. It is a
Yep.
soft word. Hey,
Right.
let them
And-
go, you know?
So, but I think one of the reasons I wanted to stop and look at this is because in all 10 plagues, shlachet ami is used. And if you don't read Hebrew, and depending on the translation
Right.
that you choose, will very much influence how you read the narrative of the
I
plagues.
choose a lot of times not to use the JPS translation.
Right, so I found when I was preparing this, I like Kasuto because it's all, it's valid Hebrew, and then there's, and at the bottom are very good explanations. But everything I've read that talks about trying to make this for an English-speaking group that does not necessarily understand Hebrew, this is one of the phrases that is most bothersome because of the fact that you've got a famous phrase from a very early translation that overshadows the attempts to do a new translation of it. I think we've done enough with it. I don't want to worry you to death. All right, so
But you
what
know,
I
you
thought
do
was-
have one other comparison, and that is the first line of Genesis. In the beginning, and the new translations are when in the beginning, or something different.
right, so you
So
have,
there is a
Create.
change of the language.
so you have many attempts in the modern translations to try to get back to what the original meaning was. There are so many places where the history of whatever country you're living in and what had been the most prominent translation in that language, I just have overcome that. Is like the issue of thee and thou, and moving into more contemporary language. It's always going to be an issue. In this particular case, I thought it was worth bringing it up. Let's move on. What I'd like to do is have somebody read for us a section on the locusts, and then we're going to look at, and that's Exodus 1-3. Let's start with that first part. I want to read 1-3, and then we'll move on to the locust itself. So who would like to read 1-3 for us?
I'll do it.
Okay,
All right.
Nina.
Sylvia, just the very beginning of the parsha?
Yes,
When
just
you say
verses
1
1-3.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your sons and of your sons' sons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me."
Okay, so that's the setup. And I think,
This is the first time I've noticed that God's hardened the hearts of the courtiers also.
yes, so the issue here is this, and I don't, the ones that are in the previous portion, I guess you didn't read them in detail, so I thought it would.
We never got to the plagues last week.
Okay, so I thought this opening is on each one of them. And that the reason for telling all this is very important here, because it's going to lead into why we have Pesach. So why must all these signs be done?
Revenge.
No, look at what, there's a
It's for the
reason.
children.
And-
The children will know, yeah, that there is a
It's
God.
for
and he
your
can do it.
sons and your sons' sons. This is for history, for eternity. The reason, because when you think about the Haggadah, so the reason you have to do all this is I could just say, Pharaoh, let these people go. I'll do a big plague one, and they'll all go out. Well, then that shows who's the power being shown for?
But
Whose children?
to prove that to the people who did not come as a nation and did not come as somebody believing in God, the power of God and an all-consuming God.
Right, but is this for the children of the Egyptians or the children?
No, it's for
The
us.
children of the Israelites.
Right.
That's true, that we will, for all the generations, for thousands of years, you will remember what happened here. That's what, if you look at these two parashiyot are very long. and very detailed. And the reason for all this is that we, in our time, should feel the power of God through reading these signs and these wonders and what happened. It's not just that should upset Pharaoh and his courtiers. And I think that's really important that's the reason for this. And when you read it, and we're now going to read the section about the locusts, it's not something that you would want to have happen to you. So let's skip to the section for the locusts.
You know,
Sylvia?
say something.
Can I just interject something?
Absolutely.
Just very quickly, in the first sentence, and Ron mentioned it, why did he harden the hearts of Pharaoh and his courtiers? But I remember something from last week's Parsha, because it jumped out at me. Some of the Egyptians actually acknowledged our God. I don't remember which line, but some of them finally said that the Israelites, God.
I think all the way through Torah, I'll call them foreigners, recognized that our God existed. They just didn't believe in him.
Right, I'm not saying they believed in him, they just said, whoa.
Yeah, but
Their
it's all-
God
it's
is
all through
really
Torah,
doing
that
this.
kind of stuff.
They acknowledged that our God was causing the
Yes,
plagues, and
you-
so I'm wondering if that's why here it says. and
I
his
think
courtiers.
you'll see as we go through, there are several places where the courtiers, the magicians say, this is enough, let them go.
Right.
Their God is very powerful.
Right.
So, and because the courtiers and the people surrounding Pharaoh, their hearts have not been hardened. They're getting overwhelmed
Right.
in this one, which is plague number, let's see. This is number 8. The courtiers and the magicians are softening, so now they have to be hardened also to help, because Pharaoh is going to keep resisting. Elliot, what are you gonna add?
I think this is very relevant to today in terms of people and their notion as to God, whether they believe in God and whether he listened to us and whether he plays an active role in what happens in our lives. Right here today, I'm sure the membership of B'nai Yeshurun differ widely in terms of their perception of this very concept.
Absolutely. We have all kinds of
So
ideas.
it's very relevant.
Yes, but I think what's most important here is this instruction that this is not being told for the benefit and just the fear and to harden the hearts of Pharaoh and his courtiers, but so that we, and not just we, meaning that generation, but all coming generations, the sons of your sons, the children of your children, shall know what happened and how powerful God can be. So let's skip to the actual plague. The locust is
13.
13 through 15.
Locust.
376.
It's on page 376 in this version. If you're using a different one, it's Exodus 10:13.
I don't think people realize how horrible locusts can be. I remember as a child in Israel, locusts actually destroyed all the agriculture.
Yes, so we're going to read here the locust plague. If somebody, see, I had yes, it's 13 through 15. Does somebody want to read 13 through 15, 11, 13? It's 10, 13 through 15.
Sylvia, I can.
Go ahead, Linda.
So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord drove an east wind over the land all that day and all night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened, and they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left, so that nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt.
I caught a word in the middle of that, the darkened,
Yeah.
everything was darkened. The
Yes,
Hebrew is chashach.
yes.
It's the same as the choshech later for the people.
Correct. So this is the beginning of this whole, that's one of the reasons, if you're looking at darkness, the darkness is beginning to come. So I want to, first, do we have the picture before we look at some of the classic commentaries on it? Then let's look at what, the first thing is the east wind. And for those of you who don't have it in front of you, I'll have people here in the, who are in present. Well, the first one I found was from Rashi on the issue of the east wind. So if somebody wants to read that one, do not, here's an extra. Oh, sorry. Okay. Pass it over. Got it. Okay, who'd like to, Larry, want to read the one about the east wind?
It was an east wind that brought the locusts because that came blew in the direction opposite to Egypt. Since Egypt was in the southwest relative to Palestine, and it explained in another place. Neither after them shall be touched. That plague of locusts, which happened during the days of Joel, of which is said, there have not been ever the like, which statement teaches us that it is more grievous than that in the days of Moses, was however caused by many species of locusts together.
So the first big thing is the east wind. And where the east wind is from. So because in geography, if we all can picture where Egypt is located. So the east wind is coming from where Canaan, where Israel is today. The east wind is blowing that way to bring the locusts.
Yeah, but that's an exaggeration, because that's northeast.
So, and
Canaan
But in
is way east north.
It is
Yeah.
more,
But in the Eitz Chaim, it says
Arabia.
the east wind, the hot dry wind originating in the Sahara. They're claiming it comes from the
the desert.
Sahara.
Yeah, because Israel is actually north.
but it's also east. So the other part would be Arabia. Because the Sahara is the other direction.
You wouldn't have locusts there. You wouldn't have locusts.
No, you wouldn't have locusts coming from the Sahara. It has to come from an area that has vegetation.
No, I'm thinking Saudi Arabia.
So that's one of the questions is where's the east wind coming from? So then, I
Which is
also,
backwards from the way the wind blows. too.
right, it's also backwards from the way the wind normally blows. So, and we're gonna look now at Shemot Rabbah has a very interesting on what happened here also. Shemot Rabbah is one of the big commentaries on the Bible, and there are several in that section, in the section on Exodus that were of use. I thought this one was very nice. If someone wants to read this one out for us. I need somebody in the room here because not everybody online has them. Okay, Linda, want to do that one?
And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses, hold out your hand. Why did he bring locusts upon them? Because they had made Israel sowers of wheat and barley. Therefore, he brought upon them locusts, and they ate all that Israel had sown for them. And Moses held out his staff over the land of Egypt, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh drove an east wind over the land all that day and night. Why did the Holy One, blessed be he, make the time for the plagues tomorrow? And he didn't bring them immediately, so that they would turn back through them and they would do repentance. And the locusts went up.
So what I like about this is it's locusts because the Hebrew slaves had been required to plant all the grains that locusts eat and didn't get any benefit of them. So that it's interesting. It's definitely midrashic. It's just, but I thought that it was interesting in terms of what was decimated. Then Alter has a very interesting section on here about the locusts, which I took this footnote from his commentary. And Ivan's not there today. I know he usually does these, and I thought, well, if he's not here, I can have them here for you. So the Alter one, if somebody wants to read that one out, so I don't do all the reading.
I'll read it.
Take it.
I have offended, forgive, pray my offense just this time. Take away from me this death. The mastery of dialogue so often manifested in biblical narrative is striking here. Pharaoh's confident, imperious, aristocratic speech has now broken down into contrite confession and short, urgent pleas. The dense layer of consuming locusts, blinding the eye of the land and penetrating every crevice, is given no name by Pharaoh except its palpable meaning for him and his people, this death. That choice of name for it, of course, is an unwitting anticipation of the last of the plagues, which will soon come.
So as some of you had already picked that up, so that it's an interesting anticipation. Now Fox does a different kind of anticipation here about the locust plague. He says, anticipating Pharaoh's eventual capitulation, the Egyptians now urge their king to release the Israelites before Egypt is truly lost. That's right after what we've just read. This request occurs before the plague does. This longest plague is in many ways the most devastating of all, affecting as it does the very soil itself. Here, the last two plagues are anticipated. The ground became dark, and this death. You see that both the modern commentators are very aware of the foreshadowing in the locusts of the last two plagues, which is one of the reasons for seeing that they're in pairs or in triads. And the previous one is also foreshadowed. Also, and this, I only found this in Fox, in the locust removal, where did all the locusts go? To the sea of, they all are dumped into the sea of reeds, which is as with a powerful wind, foreshadowing that we're going to cross that sea. So I've not seen anyone else make that comment about where they went. That when the wind blows them away after they've done their damage, they're all dumped into the Red Sea.
Maybe there was so
Don't they
much
die?
data pathway so that even though the seas separated, I mean, when you think of all those locusts there, they could have made a highway.
So after they've done their damage, all the dead locusts blow away and they blow to the Yam Suf. Which as I say, I didn't find it in any of the classical midrashim, but Everett Fox notes that seems to be a foreshadowing of what's going to happen next.
We don't worry about what happens after the plague is. The same thing can be said about the cows. Plague comes and they're dead, but we don't discuss what's going to happen to all the dead cows. I mean, they had to clean them up.
Back up to the frogs.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly the same thing. However, in the so Fox is the only one who says, well, where did all the dead locusts go? If you read carefully, they blew in the direction of the Yam Suf. Yes.
So here's something funny I thought of. Between the frogs and the locusts and maybe anything else that blew that way. That's why there was dry land. So we could cross.
Right,
There were
Linda
all
said
those-
that, yes, all the debris went that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
That's if you're gonna go to a
Thank you.
naturalistic understanding, which I'm trying to stay away from.
But the truth is that we have no evidence of really what happened.
That's exactly right. That's why this.
We have no evidence that the Exodus happened.
Well, I don't want to get into that. We do know that there are references in ancient Egyptian papyri to a group of people called the Hapiru who were in Egypt. So, that's the only
That's it.
surviving.
Right.
So the question is, we have no surviving evidence. Now, I wouldn't say that we have no evidence. That's one of the big questions when something is so long ago. I always put that caveat, no surviving evidence. Well, that's true. You can't, the only thing are those couple of papyri that have the term Hapiru in them.
It is a question of faith.
Well, it's sustained us for thousands of years. We're still here, so there must be some evidence of something. If this is our origin, fine. We believe it's our origin, and that's why we live the way we do. So let's go on and take a deep dive now into darkness. And the darkness one is, it's we're going to go pretty far. It's Exodus 10:21 to 23. So let's read it carefully And then we'll look at, I found some, there, it's pretty disturbing even without the commentaries, and then we'll go into the commentaries. So who would like to read out 21 to 23 so we get the exact? Okay, Larry's gonna do it. Go ahead.
Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, darkness that can be touched. And Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days, no one could get up from where he was. But all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwelling.
So before we look at
I want to talk about the 3
the
days.
commentaries, let's ourselves do the shot, the simple meaning of what we've got here. And Ron wants to start.
Well, I always understood this as that the darkness was for 3 days. And then it was explaining that the people couldn't see each other for 3 days. But a lot of the commentaries say it was 3 days and then another 3 days.
Well, so
And I'm not sure how to read it. And I guess I have to go back to the source, but
okay, so this appears to say 3 days.
yeah, I think it's just talking about the same 3 days.
Well, but let's stay with the simple meaning here. What else do you get out of the simple
To
meaning?
me, is that darkness is very dilapidating.
So the word darkness itself is explained twice.
Yeah. As I said before, social, but it also, if a person has a cataracts, for example.
No, I'm going to interrupt you. I want to stay with the shot, with the simple meaning that's here, not anything else. So there's 2 descriptions of darkness here.
They could touch it. which
A
is-
darkness that can be touched. That's one
That's
example.
something that
So what is a darkness that can be touched? And then there's a second example here. That's a description of the darkness.
Also, it froze you. You couldn't.
It
move.
says it's a thick darkness.
Right.
So a
Well-
darkness that cannot be touched and a thick darkness. So before any commentators, keep the commentators out of your head.
Okay.
What is a darkness that cannot be touched
says
and what
can
is
be
a thick
touched. It
darkness?
says can be touched.
A darkness that can be touched,
Yeah.
sorry. What is a darkness that can be touched? And what is a thick darkness?
It's not 100% darkness. You can still see something. That reminds me.
So that's Esther's explanation. Thank you. Let's try other people's. What is a darkness that can be touched?
According to the Eitz Chaim, it's like sand, dust, soil particles. It's stuff that you can touch, but you can't see through it, and it blinds your eyes. It ruins your eyes because it gets into your eyes.
So that's an example.
That's the example given here.
Okay, Nina, what do
Eitz
you
Chaim.
think?
Well, to me, a darkness that you could touch might be death. And the darkness that freezes you, or whatever word you want to say, it says here, could not get up, would be a spiritual darkness.
And what's a thick darkness? So there's all these descriptions of this darkness.
I was thinking, a thick darkness is you lose your balance. And I'm thinking in Petach Tikva in Israel, there's a museum of darkness. And if you go through it, you completely lose your balance. There's no way you can ride a bike or do anything. It is a complete darkness.
Thank you. So that's an example of if you're in darkness for a prolonged period of time. So it's 3 days of this. If you're in this kind of thick darkness, what does that do to you for 3 days?
Screws up your sensory perception.
Sensory
Loses up
deprivation.
your sensory perceptions. That's an interesting way to put it. Yes. Larry.
it was almost either like a fog or like even like an ash. Because, before we were kind of, saying that people have tried to explain this on a natural basis. So to me, it's almost like at the end, there was an explosion, a volcano or something, where there was something raining down an ash, one you couldn't see, but you could actually touch it. But it was so thick, an actual physical. In other words, it wasn't the darkness that was there was something causing the darkness which was something that was tactile, like an ash.
So if the footnote in the Eitz Chaim implies that it's something tactile that caused it. Let's look now, on this one, I brought a lot of commentaries because I thought that they were really, there's so much to say about this. So the first one is from Sforno. And why this is not the normal darkness called night. So does everyone see where it starts? This will remove the normal darkness called night.
We have the stars at night.
Yeah, so let's if someone wants to read that one out, what Sforno said. Judy, you want to do that one? No? Okay,
I should read it.
thanks.
The reason this is necessary was that, this will remove the normal darkness called night. The reason this was necessary was that night consists of air ready, capable to absorb light in the morning. Darkness that would occur now was something unable to interact with light at all. The reason for this inability to interact with light was the density of this texture of this darkness. As a result of this totally different darkness,
Lo ra'u ish et ra'ehu. A person could not see his neighbor.
or even it lit up the flare that would not be able to make a dent in that darkness.
So that's Sforno's understanding. That it's you can't compare it to night. Because night is preparing for some light. That's, anybody want to comment on that a little more? Because then we'll look at Rashi. Okay, I always love what Rashi does because it's he's always the most basic. So Nina, you want to take Rashi?
Sure. There was darkness of gloom, oh, that's a good word, when no man saw another during those 3 days. And there was moreover another period of 3 days darkness, twice as thick as this, when no man rose from his place. One who happened to be sitting when the second period of darkness began was unable to rise. And who was then standing was unable to sit. And why did he bring darkness upon them? Because there were wicked people amongst the Israelites of that generation who had no desire to be redeemed.
So
Rashi brings
so
up the 3 days. and
so-
not 3
so
days
Rashi
that
said-
I questioned. I
so
didn't
Rashi
say 3 days.
says, oh, it's not 3 days, it was 3 days, and then there was another 3 days. And there's I don't know if we'll have time for it. There's if it's in here is the Midrash. The other 3 days was because there were Israelites who didn't want to leave Egypt and they had to be gotten rid of. And had to be gotten rid of in the darkness, that the Egyptians would never find out there were some people who didn't want to leave. So, and I don't think we'll get time to read that one, but I thought that was terrific. Now, I'm going to skip the Ibn Ezra because I'm looking at the time. I want to read the Rambam. I want to read the Ibn Ezra because the Ibn Ezra is the only one of the classic commentators who relates it to something natural. And Elliot, maybe, do you want to read that one? I think you'll like it. It's at the bottom.
Rambam on Exodus,
The Ibn Ezra on Exodus.
and they saw,
It's at the.
Ibn Ezra, below.
oh, Ibn Ezra. Stretched forth.
Yes,
As what the Egyptians had no way of knowing that 3 days passed, except for the Israelites who had light. Now there are times when a thick darkness comes over the Atlantic Ocean, during which time it is impossible for a person to distinguish between day and night. The aforementioned occasionally lasts for as long as 5 days. I myself have been there many times. I'm not sure.
and there are many times so that's the only one of the commentators, because apparently where Ibn Ezra lived in Spain, he had seen this kind of darkness. And I thought that that's fascinating that one of the classic commentators relates it to the darkness that he had seen over the Atlantic Ocean. And somebody's got their sound on who's making a lot of noise. So if that's you, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. So he has said he has seen it over the Atlantic Ocean for as long as 5 days, where people can't see each other.
Oh,
Somebody needs to mute.
Somebody is making a lot of motions.
He's mute.
Oh,
Maybe we should all be muted.
yes.
I think it's Steve.
To be the host, I can do anything.
Okay, so he'll fix it.
That's right. Mute everybody.
So, you find it? He's gonna take care of it.
There is on top.
Okay, thank you. So I'm trying to think when Ibn Ezra is a medieval commentator in the height of the Jews in Spain. So before the Inquisition. So his writing is around, I think 1000, 1100, I'm not sure. But I thought it's amazing that he actually refers in his explanation to natural phenomenon to help you understand it, that he had seen something like this that lasted 5 days. So don't be so surprised.
But was it a fog or some kind of a storm or an eclipse that lasted 5 days?
I don't know. So he says he's seen this thick darkness over the Atlantic Ocean that lasts that so long and nobody can distinguish between day and night. So,
The day of no moon.
But for 5 days, I mean,
days.
it's hard to imagine what could have caused that.
well, but it's interesting because I had always thought of this darkness as a horrible sandstorm, which would be what the Eitz Chaim is trying to say.
But
But Ezra is saying, well, no, I've seen this over the Atlantic Ocean. So,
can it also be
In a
that
sandstorm, you can feel. If it's plain darkness, you really can't move because you don't know where you're moving to.
can it
Yeah.
can it also
There's no
be,
contrast.
I can also see it לא ראו איש את רעהו, as we are people, we need other people. And it was so dark that it was a terrible feeling that you couldn't see your neighbor, you couldn't see your kids, you couldn't see your family. To
well,
me,
that's why the description is so frightening. Because it doesn't say darkness, meaning so dark you can't move. It says, ish lo ra'at re'ehu. It was so dark you couldn't find your neighbor. So it's that everybody in this darkness is isolated. There's no sense of community. You're frightened and you're alone in this darkness. And I thought that's why it's so terrible. And what I want to do, I brought you another couple pages of this. I want to do the Robert Alter on this one, because I think this really helps us, which is on the next. You see where it says Robert Alter on this one. Because we don't have time to do all of them.
You want me to read it?
Sure, please.
The Lord said to Moses, is that the right?
Yeah,
sentence?
yeah.
As in each third plague in the 3 triads that make up the sequence of 9, this plague is implemented without warning. The omniscientness of 3 days of total darkness suddenly enveloping Egypt without advance notice prepares the ground psychologically for the climatic 10th plague, a darkness one can feel. The force of the hyperbole, which beautifully conveys the claustrophobic palpability of absolute darkness, is diminished by those who try to provide a naturalistic explanation for this plague, or indeed any of the others, i.e. a desert wind bearing particles of sand and dust darkens the land and makes the darkness palpable. Nor would solar eclipse work as an explanation, since the darkness persists for 3 days. Although elements of nature are used in all of the plagues, except perhaps this one and the next, they are all emphatically presented as extraordinary interventions by God in the order of nature, signs and portents that demonstrate his power over the created world. No one saw, no one rose. Abraham, Ibn Ezra, and Nachmanides both shrewdly infer that this total incapacity through darkness would logically have had to include the disabling of candlelight.
So it's interesting that Alter, who a lot of us think is a modernist and much more rational, says here, Don't try to make this natural. You can't make it a wind. You can't make it a solar eclipse.
Right.
You know, it's more than that. And it's really absolutely catastrophic to be in the dark like this for 3 days with no warning,
Or 6.
or 6.
Do you think it could be that Hashem is finally saying to them, I've got you in my grip now? To put you psychologically, physically, spiritually, emotionally, just frozen and by yourself. And probably to me would be the most horrific to be like that in darkness and can't do a thing about it.
Absolutely.
We got 2 on the screen.
Okay, where we got?
Nathan wanted.
Nelson, go ahead.
I
Nelson,
wanted to say, I think we're focusing too much on the word darkness. I think of it as a thick fog, where it's so thick, a candle wouldn't light the room. You couldn't see across the room. I've been on the highway in fogs like that, where you just had to stop because you couldn't tell if there was a vehicle in front of you, and you hope no one was behind you.
yes, I would agree with that, but I think the wording here of this particular plague, which is why because if we know that the next one is Makat Bechorot, the slaying of the firstborn. But if you look at the gradation here in the 3 plagues that are in Parshat Bo, and I'm going to do a little summarizing here because we don't have time to get into the last one. In locust is getting the earth, but it's dark. Darkness now, we mentioned it, that it turns the earth dark. Darkness now, you are 3 days in the dark, or 6 days, depending on how you understand it. And you're powerless. You can't find your neighbor. You can't find anybody to help you. And the last darkness, Makat Bechorot, is going to be the darkness of death. And the only thing we have time to look at is Alter says here, of all the categories to indicate the comprehensiveness of the plague about to be enacted, this is, of course, the scariest. Pseudo also locates the phrase in this, we don't have time to read it all through. It says they're going to kill everyone from the firstborn of the highest to the slave girl behind the millstones.
I find the killing of the slave girl behind the millstone, I find that ironic because we're trying to free the slaves. Why would you be killing the slave girl?
Well, because
These would
they're
be
from the highest,
non-Hebrew
the
slaves.
highest to the lowest is,
Yeah.
that it's so scary to be this way.
But
And,
according to Chazal, God spared Pharaoh twice. He was the firstborn and he wasn't killed. And in the Red Sea, he was saved again, only to get a chance to do tshuva later.
Right, so the question though is, if you look, and here I just want to summarize what we were trying to do this morning, because we couldn't, I wanted to do the deep dive into the darkness one the most, because it's really got so much in it, and that's why I gave you 2 pages of the sources on it. The idea of looking at the plagues as grouped and a gradation getting worse and worse and worse. Death is the worst. You can't come back from that. The fact that when you get to the last plague, God delivers that plague. It's not delivered through the hand of Moses. It's not delivered through the hand of Aaron, not through the staff, not through the rod, not through the hand. And it's not delivered through God's angels. It's delivered by God. So, it's when you talk about a gradation of catastrophe that we're to remember through all the generations, because the instructions of it are it's 11:4 and 5 in what we just were reading. But then the carrying out of it is at the end of Parshat Bo and in chapter 12, after all the instructions of how to leave Egypt and get ready how to slaughter the lamb so that the blood of it is on your doorpost. That's the origin of the mezuzah. Then how to bake your bread, which becomes the matzah. How to dress quickly. And if your children ask you, that's the origin of the 4 sons. all that is in the balance of Parshat Bo, and then they are killed.
Do you
And,
have time for a quick question?
Sure, I'll take one question.
I
Sure.
am really puzzled by the translation of Makot to plagues. Because
Thank you. So that,
We
so,
actually talked about that. I don't know if it was another class or last week.
okay,
That my coat doesn't mean plague. There's another word for plague. Not starts with a nun.
right.
This
No,
is
Negefah.
this is the same verb as hitting the rock or killing
Yes.
the
But-
taskmaster.
So Everett Fox translates it as blows.
Yeah,
The
because
10 blows, because the word
Makai
makah,
is to smite. Makai is to smite.
right, so it's the same issue as what we talked about, shlachet ami, that makah being translated as plague is so pervasive in English as the meaning of this word, that even though there's attempts in some of the translations to use something else, this as the meaning of it, because in English, the word plague is something that is overwhelming, an overwhelming catastrophe. And so the meaning in English has been attached here. And-
They do
and-
the same thing with the Ten Commandments. It's the same.
Right, Aseret HaDibrot,
Right.
yeah, it's the 10 sayings. So, because for the majority of the people who are doing this, their native tongue was English, the connotations and intonations and history behind the use of a certain word, if it was used, especially don't forget the first translations of the Bible into English were that come through the Americas are through the King James Version.
Yeah.
So that King James Version is the one that was printed in the United States and used for so many years. When the Jews try to do their JPS translation, it's, an attempt they realize there's enough English speakers that there's a need for an English translation in the United States.
The King
There's
James
still-
Version, did that come from the Hebrew or did it come from the Greek?
It came from the Latin, from the
Or
Vulgate.
it came from the, yeah. So it's already been translated once and messed up.
Right, so it went, so
Yeah.
and the Vulgate came from the Greek,
Right,
which
right.
came from the Aramaic, so it's been through three versions, 3 steps away from the Hebrew in the first place.
It
Plus,
loses
there
in
are different
translation.
scrolls have different versions in some cases.
Correct, but
Yeah.
in particular, in studying this parsha, the echoes of this early English translation, which was the one that was most printed and most distributed in the United States of America, and affected all the translations that have been done in this country, really hit in this parsha when you look at Makah, Shlachet Ami, all these other things. And now we mentioned the one Aseret HaDibrot, which is later in here. These are all things that that translation affects how we react to reading the Hebrew and seeing these modern translators, commentators who are working very hard to try to look back at the cognates in the language of Alter in particular, is working on looking at Akkadian and at Ugaritic and the other languages of the surrounding area to get the right meaning of the Hebrew. Fox is trying to work from the Buber and Rosenzweig translation into German that did the same thing, which he thought was one of the best translations that stayed the closest to the Hebrew in trying to bring a translation. And that Buber Rosenzweig translation was only used in German, and he's tried to take that into English. So those are 2 attempts in our time to try to get closer to what was the original meaning. What did the people who heard this when it was read, what were the languages around them that influenced how they understood this? Because don't forget, this was read to people. We know that in the book of Ezra, when they begin to read it aloud in the public square, that which brings us to our Torah readings today. I've got to pay attention to time. I want to thank you all for joining me.